Okay, let's go. So extend Cumulocity IoT with open source. What I will show you today is the following. I will start to do a very basic definition of what is actually open source and what are misassumptions sometimes what is open source. Then I will talk about the extensibility of Cumulocity IoT. I will show you a demo how you can actually find out how to extend Cumulocity IoT. As a third bullet point, I will show you what is actually there, what kind of open source components do we have right now, and how I can use it in my existing Cumulocity instance and tenants. And the fourth agenda point will be if you are willing not only to consume open source software and extend your tenant, but also to contribute something to the ecosystem. I will give you some guidelines how to do so. Finally, I will give a summary and show you some links I used in the demos. And then, of course, we have the Q&A. Okay, let's go. Let's start with the open source definition. First of all, open source means that source code that is made freely available for possible modification and redistribution. That's the main definition, which is very common. There's also the open source model, which is somehow an extent to the open source software, because the open source model stands for the decentralized software development model that encourages collaboration. And this is very important. Open source does not just mean putting something online and make it available, but also the open source model is very important, that something is developed decentralized and with multiple parties in a collaborative way. So there are also sometimes some misassumptions about open source. So I just made a bullet point where open source does not stand for. Open source does not stand for free software without restrictions. Of course, open source software is freely available, but it comes also with an open source license, and sometimes these licenses have some restrictions. For example, that if you use the open source software in your component, you agree to also open source the component you have developed where you use open source software. This is just one example of restrictions, but there are some multiple other restrictions which comes with open source licenses. Also open source, and this is more related to the open source model, it does not mean I just consume things and I don't give anything back. Yeah? So it's sometimes happening that I just use an open source component, I found a bug, and I do not report any issues because my assumption is someone else will fix it soon. This is not how open source works. Open source works as a community. So if you use the software and you find something, you can contribute by creating an issue and saying, hey, I found a bug. I do not have the capabilities to fix it. Is there anyone out there who in the community who wants to fix it? Yeah? So this is a collaborative way how we should do it. Also, there's a misassumption with open source, you cannot make any money. There's no commercial way of using open source. This is also a very common misassumption. Open source can be seen as an entry level for multiple companies where we can provide some freemium software, community editions of your software. And if you want to scale out to much more business-like business scenarios, then of course you need a commercial license for that. Or there are some other commercial ways how to leverage open source software. So there's definitely a way how you can leverage open source. Now let's talk about Cumulocity. Cumulocity IoT is of course closed source with some exception, which is a Synedge IO. But most of the core is closed source, but it is very extensible and extensible with using open source software. And you will see soon in the later chapters, that we have already a lot of components, how we can extend it with open source software. So let's talk about the Cumulocity IoT extensibility. So The first question I wanted to answer is actually what can be extended in Cumulocity? What are the artifacts I can extend with Cumulocity? And I try to categorize them in multiple categories. The first one is backend. I just call it backend for a business logic, like typically we have in microservices, like I want to have my custom API for a mobile app, or I want to have a custom API for my custom user interface. I want to have some schedule logic or calculation logic. There we have the microservice technology in Cumulocity IoT, where we allow to push your custom implemented microservice to the platform and can extend it in this way. On the other side, we also have, I would say, a non-so developer way how you can extend the platform when it comes to analytics. If you know Cumulocity well, we have multiple ways how you can deploy your analytics rules to the platform. One of it is, of course, the analytics portal, an analytics builder, which is a graphical way how you can define your analytics models and then just deploy them to your tenant. There's also a more developer way when it comes to defining analytics models, which we call the EPL app. There we have also EPL, so-called EPL models, where you can define your analytics models and then deploying them. And when it comes to machine learning, we have the machine learning execution engine, where you can define your machine learning models and then deploy them to the Cumulocity platform itself. And all these artifacts in the backend, of course, must be defined by yourself. Yeah, this is actually the core of your IoT solution. The microservices and the analytics model you can define yourself, and then you can deploy it there. And of course, we have already some pre-built components in open source, like microservices and analytics models and analytics builder blocks, for example, which you can use to extend the existing functionality of the platform. Then I have to define the category embedded. Embedded is more likely related to the device integration part of Cumulocity IoT. Here we talk about, we're talking about an IoT platform. So the main thing of an IoT platform is, of course, integrating devices. And how can this be done? You need some kind of software artifact, which we call an agent, which is building the bridge between the physical device and our API in the platform to transfer the data, or vice versa, to receive commands and then execute the commands on the device. And here we have the concept in the platform that we have some pre-built APIs, of course. We also have some SDKs. We also have the SynEdge.io, if you are aware of that, which is an open source, a fully open source project, which is focusing on this area of integrating devices, which is also can be extended with plugins. So this is the embedded area. And then we have the area of front end, where actually users see the Cumulocity IoT platform, where we have custom brandings of the existing applications. Of course, you can have fully new designed front ends. You can have widgets or plugins embedded in your existing dashboards to extend some existing dashboards with new visualization of the data. This is the front end category, how you can extend it. And this, I would say, is the core how we can extend the Cumulocity IoT platform. We have the backend logic, we have the embedded logic for device integration, and we have the front-end logic. So to summarize it, we can extend it on multiple levels. If we now take these all artifacts and put them on the system landscape, you can see that we have, of course, we have the Cumulocity IoT Cloud, we have the Cumulocity IoT Edge, we have the SynEdge, and all of them are open and extensible in that area. And this is what I wanted to show you with this picture, that we can, of course, build microservices and use microservices in the cloud, of course, and we can upload them. We can also upload them on the edge, and we can also build stuff for the SynEdge, for the device integration, to plug into some specific protocol and map it to the Cumulocity platform. We can also extend it, of course, by building a device agent using a pre-built SDK we are shipping. These are all the things across the system landscape, how we can extend the Cumulocity IoT platform beyond the standard functionality we have. When it comes to the capabilities of the platform to supporting that, we have a lot of tooling on the right side here in the slide, which comes to implementing the API endpoints, the REST API endpoint, but also on the left-hand side, as I mentioned several times already now, when it comes to device integration, we have some device SDK for C++, we have the SynEdge, and of course, we have some open source agents already there. The platform itself, as a standard, offers some protocols how to integrate that. We have the REST protocol, of course, which we can use for device integration. We have MQTT, we have lightweight N2M, and we have some others, Cloud Fieldbus. I just do not mention here because of simplified things. And on the other side, we have an open API, the open REST API, which can be used to integrate other systems, of course, where you can retrieve some data, ingest some data from other cloud systems, and so on. And when it comes to the core capabilities of the platform to supporting this whole extensibility, I think the most important thing is what Cumulocity has is the one below. We have a very flexible and extendable data model. The data model, if you know Cumulocity, is very simple. I don't want to go into much detail, but it's simple. You can define what is the device, but it's also very extensible because you can define yourself how you define what is the device and what are the capabilities. And we just give you some limitation of like, we need a name, we need a type, and everything else you can freely decide how you want to describe your device, an event, an operation. So the data model is very extensible, which can be used, of course, by front-end plugins to store some user information for visualization, for microservices, of course, to store some additional data in the data model, and so on. We have some other capabilities which is coming with 10.16 now, which is a web plugin management. Before that, we had the possibility to deploy widgets. Now we have plugins. I will show you later how you can extend the Cumulocity frontend with plugins. Then we have the web application hosting or management. I will also show you in a screenshot later how this works, that we can upload any web application to the Cumulocity tenant, and then we can see what is actually uploaded. We can update it when a new version is released, and so we can see what kind of application is available and to which tenant we want to assign this web application. This is the same for microservices, which is very similar to the web application hosting and management. In the background, it's a total different story, of course, because here we're talking about mainly of backend logic and Kubernetes and containers, which are actually running. So we have some logging here and events and so on. We're supporting as a service to extend the platform with microservices. We have the analytics builder with a model management, which gives you an overview what kind of model is currently in that tenant deployed. Is it active? Is it productive? Is it not productive? And so on. It's the same for EPL apps. It's also an analytics builder, analytics model, but more on a programmable way. Then machine learning model management, where you can see what kind of machine models you currently have deployed in the tenant. And then on top, we have the tenant options, which you can use. It's actually a key value store, where you can store some, for example, credentials for third-party services like web services, which require some credentials, which is implemented in a microservice. And then you can use the tenant options to do so, but you can also use the tenant options, of course, for any other stuff you want to do so. And this whole thing allows you to extend Cumulocity IoT in a very flexible way. So these are the capabilities of the platform itself. Beyond that, we offer some tooling. So you don't have to start from scratch if you want to extend the platform. So we have, of course, the microservice Java SDK, which helps you to easily start a microservice implementation in Java. We have the microservice C# SDK. We also have, based on the Open API and REST, we have now generated clients in Kotlin, for example, and Swift, which helps you to, if you want to not just use Java or C# or have any other programming language like Kotlin or Swift, you can use this generated clients, embed it in your component, and then, for example, build a mobile app very easily, and you don't have to implement the whole API yourself from scratch. We have the Web SDK, which is very comprehensive in a way how to build front-end applications and plugins and widgets. We have a JavaScript client which can be used, of course, also by the front ends, but also, of course, if you want to build some back-end logic based, for example, on Node.js. And we have the Analytics Builder Block SDK. If you want to extend the Analytics Builder with some custom blocks, there's an SDK which can be used to actually define new Analytics Builder blocks. There's a small reference. We had a session, I think, last year, end of last year, we had a session, developer session about that, how the Analytics Builder can be extended with the custom block. So if you're interested how to do that, the recording is available at YouTube and you can check the session there. So these are all the extension capabilities we have within the platform. We have the tooling, we have the capabilities within the platform, we have the protocols, and for the device integration, we have, of course, also some tooling. Now let me show you a demo about it and how to find actually the stuff. So first of all, the entry point, if you are interested to extend the platform, is the documentation of Cumulocity. And in the documentation of Cumulocity, you will find for each SDK we're providing as part of the platform, you will find a part in the documentation as well. For example, here, if I go to the documentation and device SDK guide, I will see some MQTT client examples in multiple languages. I see a guide how to use the device SDK for C++. I also see some things like Linux agent, and pretty soon you will also see some more information about the Synedge here, which is in the open source project. So this is for the device integration. When it comes to microservice SDK, you see the two SDKs for Java and C#. You can find the guides, the comprehensive guides here, how to get started. We have a hello world here. We have some examples and best practices for developing microservice in the documentation. For the web SDK, it's the same. We have also some tutorials, the getting started, how to get started in doing front-end development. What are the multiple levels of front-end development, like building a whole solution, building a new whole app, building a plugin, just doing a branding, internationalization. This is all part of this documentation. The first part, if you are new to Cumulocity and you want to extend it with the microservice, the front end or whatever, most likely what you need to do is to elaborate a little bit more about the API, which is most likely when it comes to front end, the REST API we are providing. And here we have the reference guide where we have the open API description. Let me show you. Where all our endpoints in Cumulocity IoT are described in detail and also with some examples. And here you can already see, if I click, for example, for the inventory objects, here we are, I can see some examples how to retrieve, manage object, get, and then I see all the parameters I can provide here by querying a device, for example, or querying a device by the name or by the owner. Here's an example for the owner and anything else. So what you actually can and should do is actually play around with it. If you have a tenant, a try tenant, or a developer tenant, you can try out the API. And if you have already a use case which you want to implement, then you should try out the API yourself. And this can be done very easily. Of course, you can use this one, and then you can use any client of your choice. There are also some examples in multiple programming languages like Python. You can just copy paste from the Open API documentation. But there's also the way that you can here click on download and just link address. And if you are aware of Postman, this is an API tooling, you can go here, click on import, and then just import the whole description file. Just do it again here. I already have it here. And then you see the whole API of Cumulocity IoT in Postman. And then you can already play around with it. For example, now I can go over here and say I want to retrieve all managed objects in my tenant. So I just authenticate myself. I have to set some environment variables here, which is pointing to my tenant. I already did, but here I have to authenticate. And then I see what is the response of that in JSON. I can work with that already. And then I can see, okay, I have a specific device, which is some specific fragments, and I can start my development as a front-end developer to actually implementing that structure. Or as a microservice developer, I can see, okay, the device has a name, has a type. So if I want to post something or I want to query something from a microservices, I can check the parameters here. They are all deactivated, and I can see what are the ways how to actually filter my device so that I can actually filter by owner. I can define a query here, so I can just play around with it. Also, if I want to create a new managed object, I see already an example payload here. Again, I just have to enter my name, my username, and send. Yeah, I just created now a device with my tracking device, which is the device which has now a device type, which is a custom fragment and supported operations, which is restart. And here I see already, okay, it has been created. This is the name. Where's the internal ID? Name. So here's the internal ID. So it has been created in the database. And if I go now to my tenant in the device table, I can see the device. So this is how you can explore the Cumulocity IoT extensibility protocols, which is here now the REST API, which in most cases is the one you should go for if you extend with microservices and front ends. When it comes to device integration, of course, the MQTT and lightweight M2M protocols are the ones you should explore more, and also find out how you can actually import devices. But this is how you can go and how you can actually start extending the platform. Let's go back to the presentation. Oh. Here we are. Now let's talk about the Cumulocity IoT open source. And with Cumulocity IoT open source, I mean open source components which are out there to extend the Cumulocity IoT platform. So the first part was more like, how can I extend Cumulocity extended? And we hopefully showed you there are a lot of points how you can extend it. And now I show you how you can actually use existing components which are out there, open source, to extend your tenant. So the first thing, where can I find open source component for Cumulocity IoT? They are not mainly part of the documentation. Yeah, if you search the documentation of Cumulocity, there might be a hint of a link to GitHub, but there are no custom component links in the documentation, with one exception, which might be the SynEdge, because it's also a product mainly developed by Software NG and other partners. But if it comes to any other component which is not developed by Software AG, but any partner, a customer, some students or whatever and just said, okay, I just developed a small widget or plugin front end or microservices to integrate system A, it's just out there at GitHub. And there are multiple ways now how you can find this content. One way I want to highlight is a component I created myself. I called it the Cumulocity IoT open source repository overview. This is another repository at GitHub. I will also show you the link shortly. This component will, on a daily basis, crawl the whole GitHub for Cumulocity IoT tags. And then create a whole list of components, open source components, which are out there, and will provide you in a table form and also in a detail list with some description that you can find out what this actually is. And what I also try to do is to categorize them in multiple ways. That I said, okay, this is a microservice, this is a widget, this is an agent, this is some examples, this is a client or command line tool, this is some simulator tooling tool simulating devices in Cumulocity. This one I tried. And I will also show you in a demo later how this works. So this is one thing you can use to find out open source content. And currently we have 357, this was the state yesterday. The screenshot I took earlier, so this was 341 only, open source repositories for Cumulocity, which is, for my feeling, is quite good. But of course, we can be much more better in increasing this number of components. But it's not about quantity, it's more about quality. Open source is not just putting anything open source which is not working, but something which is very useful and really brings value to your Cumulocity IoT tenants is also very valuable, of course. So this is one point, how you can find open source software. The extension categories already mentioned. Another thing, this is more like the official part of Software AG. We have a Software AG organization at GitHub, you can find here, where we have all the official repositories which are created by Software AG employees during some POCs, demos, maybe some other projects which the customer are agreed that we can share it open source. These components are mainly available in the Software AG org. So most of the components you also can find here are also coming from the Software AG org. And here we have also a landing page, which is accessible under opensource.softwareag.com, which is actually just crawling the Software AG org GitHub organization and just giving you a nice overview of each component, and also, of course, allows you to search for it and also to categorize it in the same way I did here. I used the same categories for my component and also introduced this to this component that you can easily find for microservices, widgets, analytics, and so on. You can just hit the filter here, but I will also show you later on in a demo. So what does it mean to just use open source software? I just showed you how you can find it. So let's assume you just searched for a microservice to extend your Cumulocity IoT solution, and you found one. What does it mean for you? First of all, if you use that component and you find out, okay, this is not working very well, or there's a bug, or there's a feature request from yourself, you have to be aware of, even this is not the software, this is a Software AG organization, these components are not officially part of the product. These components are part of the ecosystem or the community. The people who have developed it and contributed that to the community are also mainly responsible to giving support to them. There are also some components which are pretty stale. For example, the Software AG employee already left the company and the component is 5 years old. Then, of course, if you use that component and it's still working for your Cumulocity tenant, even it's 5 years old, you cannot expect that there will be support from anyone, because maybe no one feels responsible anymore. So a very good indicator by using open source components in your Cumulocity tenant is checking what is the activity, when was the last update on the GitHub component, on the open source component. How many contributors does the component have? This is an indicator for yourself to see, is this an active product, or is this not an active project? And maybe if it's for you, if this makes sense to use it, or maybe even contribute to that. If it's a very old component, maybe you can relaunch it and do something else about it. If it's a very active component, of course, you can also think about contributing the stuff and joining the community, building the open source component. So you found it and you say, okay, you see it's a very active and broadly used, and has a lot of stars and forks, and everybody likes the open source component. And now you want to find out how to install it. And again, of course, you will nothing find in the official documentation of Cumulocity, but in the repository itself, we have in the most very good projects, we have a very comprehensive README. Where you find some installation guides. I just pasted here an example how this should like, that we have some build, some how to, what is the component about, and then of course how you can install it in your tenant. In a very few, or not very few, in most cases, we have some components where we have regular releases of those components. Also releases bound to some components of some releases of Cumulocity IoT. So you can check, okay, I checked the README saying download the latest binary and then install it to your tenant, and then you click on the releases and download it and the zip files, and then you can just upload it to your tenant, and then it's done. I will also show you in a demo. And then, of course, sometimes we have some components, especially for the agents or for the front ends, where we don't have any releases, where the guide's mentioning, okay, you build the component, clone the repository, build the component, and then use the tooling, the command line tooling to deploy it to your tenant. And for that, we have some, of course, some command line tooling, like the web SDK I posted here, where you can build the component and then use the deploy option and then deploy the component directly to your tenant. Also, we have this for the microservice, where we have some Maven plugins, so you can actually clone the repository, make some changes in the configuration maybe, and then just deploy it directly from the Maven project. And you don't have to go to any UI. So this is the way how you can actually use it. You find it, you clone it, or you install it, and then you have it in your tenant. There are other ways, more easier ways how to do that, because we also have some capabilities within the platform itself. Especially if we have binaries, then you can just go to the open source, so the administration of Cumulocity. And then we have the microservice functionality, where you can click on it, just click plus add microservice. Then you just drag and drop the files here, or select the file, and then the binary will be uploaded. It's the same for the web application, how you can do it. And it's also, which is now the new functionality, if you have a plugin, you can upload plugins as well. Which I missed out here is also, of course, the analytics builder. Or the EPL, where you just can copy paste some EPL logic and so on and can deploy it. Or we also have some command line tools, like in the last session, we showed how you can actually deploy a custom block to analytics builder. So these are the tooling we have within the platform. And here are some, because we have a lot of examples, very good examples of open source components, I just selected a few one. And I'm sorry, guys, if I missed some components you're proud of and you developed yourself. But here are just a few one, which I find mention worthy. This is the one also we showed earlier last year, in the series of IoT developers, which is developed mainly by Christoph Strack, which is the MQTT mapping component, which is actually doing the mapping from generic MQTT payload to the Cumulocity data model. We have the Cumulocity Node-RED example, where Node-RED can be deployed as a microservices directly to Cumulocity, and the frontend is also embedded. This one I will also show you later in the demo. We have the SynEdge, of course, as a device integration framework. We have the application builder for Cumulocity, which allows you easily to build custom applications with a lot of new widgets. We have the command line tool, the Go Cumulocity command line tool, which has been developed by Ruben Miller, which is a very, very powerful and helpful tool to explore the API beyond the thing I just showed you with Postman, which is much more powerful than Postman, in my opinion, because you can also simulate things, you can pipe different commands, getting a device, then use this payload for another request, and so on and so on. So very helpful tool. We have the Cumulocity Digital Twin Manager, which allows you to model your device or asset hierarchy and assets in Cumulocity IoT. We have a Cumulocity IoT device management reference agent, which can be seen as a demo agent to demo all the device management capabilities of Cumulocity IoT. We have the migration tool, which can be used to migrate from one tenant to another, mainly migrating data and dashboards from one tenant to another tenant, which is also mainly a UI tool. So this is, again, just an example of open source components, which are not part of the product, but are provided as open source components, and you can use to extend your tenant. And there are a lot more things. And I would ask you to actually go to the resources I just showed you and check what is there for you. And I will be very sure that there are some components like widgets and agents and microservices you might find useful for your use case. Now let's have a short demo about it. Let's see. Can move this here? No. Then let's start like this. So the first thing I just wanted to show you how you actually can search for open source software. Yeah, so this is the official entry point for searching for open source components for Cumulocity IoT. I click on IoT Analytics, and then I have now all the repositories which are part of the Software AG GitHub organization. And now I can, for example, click on microservices, and then I find 19 microservices here, which is a dynamic MQTT mapper, the Cumulocity Node-RED. I have a small description here. I see it's pretty active. I have 8 stars here. I have the microservice template, which might be useful. So this I can find out maybe a component which I want to use. There's another thing, and this can be accessed directly via the GitHub Software AG org. Here we have the Cumulocity OS repo overview, which is not now limited to only the Software AG components, but is crawling whole GitHub for Cumulocity IoT packages. So this is what I showed you earlier, giving you an overview of all available open source repositories. I have the newest repositories which has been created soon, or the latest. And here I see the open source repositories with the most stars, like the Go CI I just mentioned, the app builder, the Python API, and a lot of other stuff. And of course, I also have some categories. If I click here on the HTML side, I have much more details. I can here click now on microservices, and then I can find some more details about it. What is the license used? How many stars does it have? When was the last commit? And so on. There's some issues with the batching things here. This is a server issue with the batching stuff. But now let's do one thing. I just wanted to show you one end-to-end example. And I start with the Node-RED example, which has been provided by a colleague of mine, which is Tristan, because he does this pretty well. He has a very well documentation, what is this current status of this project, and he also has some releases. He also uses some tagging here that I can be easily found, that it is a web app, it is also microservices, and so on. And here I have the releases, so I can just go here and download the latest releases. This component exists of 3 components, or mainly 2. It's a microservice itself, it's a UI plugin, which is a new plugin, and it's a new full UI to actually embed Node-RED in my Cumulocity tenant. So I already downloaded them, so I don't have to download it again. The next step is now, okay, now I want to integrate it to my tenant. So what I need to do is I go to my tenant, go to administration. Here, of course, I need a tenant which has a microservice functionality enabled, which is an additional feature. And then I can click on Add Microservice, Downloads, and selecting the microservice. I think it's already uploaded. Yes, it's already uploaded. Delete this one. I can just upload it again, just to give you an example how this works. So uploading this microservice, now I click on subscribe, meaning I can just upload it and I cannot activate it in my tenant, but I want to activate it in my tenant, so I click on subscribe, meaning it will be automatically activated after it has been uploaded. Now this will take some time because my upload bandwidth is not so high here at home. That's in parallel, we can already upload the other not so big components. And here we can go to the administration again. And since a new feature is released with 10.16, which is the plugin management, I have to here add data true flag. So I actually can try it out already. And here I can go to applications, then I see the packages and my web applications. So let's start with the web application. Here I click on Node-RED UI. So this is now the full application, the web application, which is then showing here in the application switcher. So I can switch from administration cockpit to Node-RED application. This is one thing. And I can also embed Node-RED in my existing application. This is the new functionality of the packages we have right here now, that I can decide, okay, I want to have it in my cockpit, and I can add this package here. Click on this plugin. Uploading it. See what's the status of the microservice, still uploading. Okay, now I have the Node-RED plugin uploaded to my tenant, and now I need to assign it to my application. So I can go to my cockpit, for example, and then I can here click on install plugins. This is now tooling I preview, which is coming with 10.16. And here I can say, okay, now I want to have the, I don't know, dashboard, both of them. Continue. And now these plugins are installed directly to my existing cockpit application, cockpit 1 application I have in my tenant. Let's see if it's now uploaded. Otherwise, the UI will, of course, not working properly because the microservice is not working. So let's give it some more time. And all these steps I just showed you here with the UI, of course, can be also done via the API. You can use the REST API to automatically upload the artifacts directly, or of course, you can use the tooling that the command line tooling for web development, of course, or the microservices to upload the microservices in an automatic way, and also, of course, integrate them in your build pipeline. If you build a new microservice, you might want to upload them automatically into your development tenant and test it. And this can also be done. So this is just an option I showed you. If you are new to Cumulocity and you want to use the easier approach, like using UIs, this is how you can do it. You search for an open source project. Here we have the microservice now. And then we have to click refresh. And we'll see two things. The first thing is now we have a new application, which is the Node-RED application. So we have extended the existing applications of Cumulocity IoT with a custom application, which is now Node-RED. The microservice is not yet started, I guess. So this is why the reason we have the error here. Should be here right now. Yeah, now it started. And what we see here now we have Node-RED embedded directly in my Cumulocity tenant as a new application. This is one thing how you can extend it. And there's another thing, which is the plugin thing. I can go to Cockpit. And here in Cockpit, now you see I have new navigation points like Node-RED admin, which is the same here, and the Node-RED dashboard. But this is now different because I have it extended to an existing application, which is the new feature, the plugin feature I showed you. So this is actually a happy path how you can use the open source component. Hopefully there's a release, you download the release, you upload it to your tenant, and then you can directly use it, try it out, and see if it's working for you. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. Now on to the last point, main point of this presentation is how you can contribute to the IoT open source ecosystem. So the main question is not only how, but why should you do it? And there are several reasons why you should do it. The first reason is, and this is the main reason why people are contributing to open source software, they start using software, they start liking software, and they have some ideas how to improving it. Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to mention is improve the software you or your customers use. Yeah, if you find out a component, a widget, a plugin, which you find out is working very well to your use case, then of course you might have some ideas how you can extend it and to keep it updated or whatever. So you actually improve the software you wanted to use. Another motivation how to contributing to open source is reputation, especially if you are a developer. Open source contribution is something which is for some employers very well seen. Yeah, that you can see, okay, this guy is very active in open source project, not only for Cumulocity, but also maybe a smart home assistant or whatever. But he is a very active developer. He's a very good developer in open source projects. And he also developed some own projects for some other component in commercial way. So reputation is nothing we should underestimate here, why you should do this. The third point I want to mention is, once you have started developing, you get in contact with other people because people are start using your component you have contributed. You get in discussion with them. Maybe people joining your project and wanted to also contribute to your project. You get some context, yeah? and you get context to other people's, other companies, other partners. And other software companies, you might be of value for yourself. And of course, you're doing that, while you're doing that, contributing, you learn. You learn by yourself, by just doing the stuff, but you learn also by other people in that project who will give you hints how you can actually implement that much better. To give you one example, I started several open source components in my past. And of course, I defined myself not as a software developer as I started that. And I learned a lot by a lot of people giving me feedback about the open source component, saying maybe you should restructure this component, maybe you should add some more meaningful documentation in the README, maybe you should add some pipeline to build it, and so on. So you learn a lot by doing that. Also, again, this is also most likely the ecosystem part. By doing that, you get also some expert support. Yeah, if you're willing to share what you have done, people get aware of that and might be then helping you to get better with your component. Also, of course, you avoid double effort. Maybe you have already developed some things for a project yourself or for yourself as a customer, but you maybe recognized in our tech community, there are a lot of people asking the same question, and you have a solution for that. And you can avoid that other people's and other partners, or maybe your own company, is doing the same stuff again. Yeah, so you can just put it open source, and then if somebody say, I have a great idea, you can say, hey, I already have implemented that as open source. Maybe you want to join. So this is a very good one. Also, open source can be seen to promote your commercial solution. Yeah, so you can start to having an open source demo, for example, to teaser your IoT solution on top of Cumulocity, for example, like Hello World or whatever, to open the communication to potential customers, and then promote your commercial solution behind it, what you want to sell. And of course, there are very often there are some surveys around open source, and this is always on top in especially on the public and biggest open source surveys, that people are contributing to open source because they just want to give back to the community, because they learn so much from the community, they get so much software from the community and use from the community, they also just want to give back something. So of course, sometimes you have some commercial interest behind that, but sometimes you just say, okay, I have learned so much from the community, I just want to give back and just contributing my component to the community. Okay, so now just repeat the what I already answered. Yeah, there are a lot of things what you can contribute and already has been contributed, but there's still potential to new components, of course. Now let's talk about how you can contribute. The easiest way how you can contribute, it's not so complicated. You don't have to be a developer. Yeah, you just can, as I said, you can just use the component, download it, install it in your tenant, and then just use it, start using it, and maybe you find some issues. And the contributing to open source project is actually reporting issues. This is a very, very valid contribution to open source project by improving it, by saying, I found a bug. Maybe you can fix it. Yeah? So reporting issues is very, very useful. If you find something, don't just say, okay, it's not working, so I just put it aside. Just report the issue, saying even feature request. Maybe it would be good that this feature is added to the component. It's maybe a great idea the contributors of the project will think of, and then start implementing that. If you are more a developer, you can think about, okay, I like this project, but I see maybe it's not going on, and it's not going in the same direction I want to go this component to be. Then you can say, okay, I just fork it, and then I change it to my needs, and maybe then I just create a pull request back. Yeah, I added new functionality to the component, like for example, SynEdge, and I added a new functionality to SynEdge, now supporting protocol X on a production way. And then I just create a pull request and say, okay, maybe you want to merge this functionality back to your product. So creating pull request. Of course, you can also start from scratch and saying, I have a very good idea of how Cumulocity can be extended. I just start from scratch with a new component and publish it in your own GitHub account, of course. You can also go and say, okay, maybe I just don't want to start from scratch, but I'm already using this component in the past, and now the maintainer is moving on and it's not maintaining it. Take over the ownership of one component and mainly maintain the component. And this with maintain, I mean, you have used it, you know the component. Maybe you can also give some support on others on helping it, installing it. Maybe also finding new people to motivate them to actually develop for this component. This is what I call a maintainer for the component. And then this is also maintaining, just do some housekeeping. If a new Cumulocity version is coming, maybe some new APIs have been changed, the SDKs has been changed. Maybe you need to update the dependencies on your components. It's just a small change. Sometimes you can automate it. Sometimes you have to just check if there are some breaking changes and so on. But this is also a task you can do and how you can contribute. You can also say, okay, I use this component, but the documentation is not very well. So here's a pull request of an enhanced documentation of my component. And of course, you can say, okay, I have a forked component. I'm maintaining the component, somebody else forked it, and now the pull request was received. Now I'm doing the merge of these two components. So actually understanding the code of two different pull requests, or of the pull request and of the origin, and then merging just the components together to a new release of this component. So this is the how you can contribute to the ecosystem of Cumulocity IoT open source. There are multiple ways in how you can do it. The easiest one is just report issues. I think the most comprehensive one, if you're a developer, you can have a lot of flexibility how you can contribute. Here are some contribution guidelines. I will not read through all of them because of lack of time. We only have 3 minutes left. I just want to answer small questions. But here are some things like the naming, topic tagging, what should be in the description and so on. I will also share the slides with you after this session, so you can read it. To summarize it, Cumulocity can be extended in multiple ways. There's very good examples how you can get started. We have already a lot of existing open source repositories. There are two main sources where you can find open source extension. You can easily extend it with the tooling, with the platform. The contribution, every contribution counts. You can contribute to the open source component. This is what should be the message here. And everybody benefits from the open source. Here are just the links I just showed in my demo, and with all the components, all the device guides, and of course the sources of where you can find it. And just a small thing, this is not the only event. There's a whole IoT developer event series. If you're interested in other events, then just go here and register. We have the tech community where we can answer the questions, and we have the developer portal where we also have some very nice information for developers. And now I'm done with my presentation part, and now I will open the microphones for each of you to ask questions. Just give me a couple of seconds. Allow mic for all. Here we are. Are there already questions in the chat? Let me check. The guy. Okay. Okay, this is just a comment. Can you please share, Stefan, can you please share the presentation with us? Yes, of course, I will share the presentation with us as always. Also, the recording will be uploaded later on. Are there any additional questions to the things I just showed you? Come on, anyone?
Stefan, one question around licensing. Is there any sort of recommendation we give for what open source license people should be using if we are having Cumulocity open source components? MIT, Apache?
Yeah, we cannot say that because everybody can define on his own open source project which license to be used. Of course, we have some preferred licenses at Software AG we prefer to use for open source components, which it's for us internally is Apache, because it's from our side the one with the less law regulations we can see. I checked this with our legal department, but for any other partner customers, of course, you can select the license of your choice, MIT, Apache, whatever, but you have to be aware of that if selecting some kind of license, it sometimes comes with some regulations you have to be aware of. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? No, then thank you very much for attending this meeting. If there are still some other questions coming up, you can just reach out to me at Tech Community or via me directly by email. Just give me a hint. There was just another question, I guess. No. Okay, then thank you very much. See you guys soon. Bye.